Hey guys, have an amazing episode you should tune into. It's with Ally Gong. So she is unbelievable. She's done so many things, published 2 books. She started an e-commerce brand. She runs a massive YouTube channel. She does a lot of coaching. She does a lot of training. We really walk through how she gets so much done in so little time and how she's just starting these companies, testing them, failing, and then moving on, and how she's kind of found those winners over time. Really tune into this episode. Ally, thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, Jack, thanks so much for having me here. I'm super impressed by all your ventures as well, and definitely Blitz Growth too. Super excited to be here.
Nice. So I think, we had a little bit of a chat before this, and I think what I really want to do is actually find out how you sort of got started from the university standpoint, because, there's a lot of pressure, I know, in the US education system about what you study is what you sort of are going to become and be. In the long term. However, most of the jobs that people get aren't even created when they're in college or university, depending on where you're listening from. So I know you studied something different to what you do now. So what was the kind of like starting point of you in college, which then led to doing all of these different kind of entrepreneurial startups?
Yeah, sure. So I would say for me, it started actually a long time before college, closer to elementary school, where I got really into like website creation and development, had an advice column, and then kind of through like middle school and high school, I continued to study design, digital media, and of course, that's when I kind of started creating YouTube videos and created my blog. So it really started from a while before college, but it is interesting because in college, I kind of took a pivot and decided to pursue a major in economics at UCLA. So it became a very different path in terms of just the amount of academic effort that it took in a field that was very different from where a lot of my hobbies lay. So I think that, partly, as you said, it just comes from a lot of the cultural pressure and the importance that people place on career. So growing up in Silicon Valley, I had a lot of kind of push towards tech or the kind of like traditional business path. So I think that really factored into the way I planned out my college degree and path, but kind of along that way, I tried to stay really true to my own passions and integrate that with my education as much as I could.
Okay, no, that's super interesting. And I know you kind of do a lot more creative projects now in comparison to what you studied, which was much more academic and kind of corporate based. How did you sort of reposition yourself when you graduated? Because you probably had this big master plan of what you wanted to do, but then how did you sort of start your first side hustle? Or like, you mentioned, you had the blog and the YouTube channel. What was the process of just getting started with that? And what was the first, let's say, 1,000 views or the first $1,000 you made from either of those side hustles?
Sure. So I'd say in college, although I had a huge academic focus, I definitely wanted to utilize the creative field and opportunities there as well. So in college, I was really kind of focused on Instagram, and I had also signed with a talent agency called Prestigious Models. So I went out to a lot of like commercial auditions. I took a lot of acting classes in Melrose and such. For me, it's always been important to learn new skills and chase my curiosities and passions, because I do think that at the end of the day, like whatever you learn and whatever work and effort you put in towards a venture does eventually pay off. So I think that transition into more creative work would have been a lot harder if I hadn't kind of kept my grip on a lot of those opportunities and efforts during college. That being said, I think there was definitely a distinct pivotal point after college where I kind of realized that standard business and finance route wasn't really working out for me. So there was like a definitive pivot kind of period where I really decided to swing more into the creative and marketing side. I think that is just something that I had to learn through experience. I think, as a young professional, a lot of like you can do as much research as you want and talk to as many mentors, but a lot of the lessons that you learn about the industry and yourself is really through experience. So sometimes you just have to try the thing out to figure out if it's going to work for you or not.
Yeah, and one thing I noticed with like all the different things that you do, you've done so much in such a short period of time. Do you have a formula or a process, which is like just taking that jump off that cliff and assembling that plane as you go down, which is the famous saying of starting a business or some sort of side hustle. But like a lot of people never take that jump. How are you able to like just keep trying new things and keep just launching new stuff so easily?
Yeah, definitely. So you were saying earlier of me kind of having like a master plan. So I'm a huge planner. I probably had like 10 different plans going on for my life in college. So I think kind of revisiting my goals and trying to see the bigger picture in terms of my future has always been a really helpful mindset for me, especially kind of going more into this entrepreneurship route. So from very early on, I've kind of always had the dream of writing my own book, as well as starting a fashion e-commerce brand. So I think just believing in your dreams, I know that sounds really cliche, but I think like one kind of sad thing that happens to a lot of people as we grow up is we start to convince ourselves that our dreams shouldn't be followed, and over time we slowly forget about them. So I think kind of the difference in my journey has been that I always held my dreams at a very high value. So at every point, and I think that reiteration of over the years, repeating my dreams is really what brought them into reality.
Okay.
So planning definitely played a huge part for me.
Yeah. Well, I think it's obviously you're an action taker and planner, and most of it, like everybody we interview and everybody we talk to, the big difference is that it's the people who go and execute and the people who don't, that draws that line in the sand between who's starting their own companies and who aren't. And ideally, we want to motivate people to obviously try and start their own companies and side hustles. But what's your timeline? So you went to college, you did the poetry book, then you did the blog, the YouTube channel, then the e-commerce store, and I know there were some other projects in there. But what's the timeline of things that you've sort of achieved? And then we'll dive into some of those and how you actually went about launching those.
Sure. So timeline-wise, my blog has been up since 2011, and I started my YouTube channel around then as well. So I actually have like dozens of videos that I privated because I was so young and they're kind of embarrassing. But those are kind of things I've maintained through the years. So it's been like almost a decade now for those two platforms. In terms of a little bit more of like fashion and modeling stuff, something I explored in college. In terms of my book, I made the decision to write a book about my college years, sophomore year of college. And there was actually a very distinct, like decisive moment for that as well. So that's actually a project that I was working on throughout college. And I managed to finally get it published at the very start of COVID. And then kind of like half a year later, I published my second book here. The clothing line that my sister and I launched, which are Babeboxers, she pitched that idea to me last winter. And so we had like a one month like launch and planning period. And we launched that the first day of January of this year. So that's kind of like a timeline.
Nice. And so when you were deciding to write the books and launch this e-commerce store, was there any indicators which was like, okay, I should go and do this, or people are asking me to do this, I should just go and do it? What was the motivation to go and do those two things? Because they're two very big things to do.
Yeah. So I definitely think it's important to like grow your skills and be honing them, but I think market and opportunity definitely play a huge role as well. So being able to kind of spot the opportunity and take action when the time is right, I think has a good payoff and is also a great way of setting timelines for yourself, which is something I know a lot of like entrepreneurs and dreamers struggle with. So in terms of my book, LA Baby, so this is an anthology of my college stories. So for that, it's kind of like the sooner out of college I can publish it, the better. And my initial publish date for this was graduation. So I was about a year behind on that timeline.
That's interesting, actually. And then what was the process of getting it published? Because it's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah, sure. So I did kind of speak to some publishers, but I ultimately decided the best route for the book and my brand as well would be to self-publish through Amazon.
Hmm.
So there's like a lot of tutorials, a lot of people who have done a similar thing. So I think it really came down to planning and really just getting the content written, getting the design and illustrations done. And so I like illustrated and did all the design myself. So it was a lot of
Wow.
learning, but also just kind of project management, I guess, would be a good way to describe it.
Mm. Yeah, and they're pretty big books. So how did you plan out all of that content? Like, it's hard to start writing something that's so big. What was your process? Like, you're obviously a planner. What was your process of structuring it all and then actually writing it all?
Yeah. So I think for like inspiration and creative inspiration, it's always easier to keep a record and then go back and review it rather than, having a brainstorm period in the moment and trying to force those ideas out. So I'm definitely like an advocate of scribing, like taking notes. So kind of when I made that decision to write this book, sophomore year of college, I started taking note of all my stories and like significant
Mm.
learnings and events from then until the day I graduated, basically. So I kind of had multiple
Okay.
ways of doing this. But I really started actually writing this book my senior year after I had received my job offer in New York.
Hmm.
Um, so I really started, and at that time I had about, I would say, over 100 poems to work with.
Wow.
So I go to this Starbucks in Westwood every morning at 5 a.m. before my classes. It was always me and this same homeless guy there at 5 a.m. So I would go there, like with my backpack, and I had my manuscript printed out. And
Mhm.
from then on, it was an editing process, a lot of editing in terms of the story layout. So that was definitely the hardest part, like figuring out what is the
Mhm.
theme of this book and how to make it flow in a way that makes sense to the reader. So I think what I did then was just play around with a few different designs of how the book could look.
Mhm.
It could be by theme, it could be by location. Ultimately, I went with a chronological order, so it's broken
Mhm.
down into the years of college. But I
Mhm.
really kind of so part of being a doer for me is being very hands-on. So I literally
Mhm.
printed out my book and was assembling my book before it ever was a book. um,
Okay.
so I think just getting really hands-on and scrappy with the process um, is important to actually, coming up with a solid product at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think the big thing is the documentation that you had throughout the years, because it's really hard to sit down and be like, okay, I'm going to write a 10,000 word book, start page one. Whereas if you kind of like document that over time, and maybe use something like an Evernote or something like that, and then just bring them all together at the end, that seems to be a lot easier.
Right. And that's kind of definitely something that's been integrated from my content creator lifestyle because I'm sure you agree as a content creator, inspiration can strike at the randomest moments. So it's just so important to get it down. And then when you're actually brainstorming for like new video ideas or podcast ideas, then you have like a whole bank of ideas to go off of.
Yeah, what sort of tools did you use to take all your notes throughout the years?
So I'm a big journaler. So I've actually been
Mhm.
journaling since the fourth grade. So
Wow.
physical journal is probably my most consistent form of note taking.
Mhm.
I did do like iPhone notes throughout college, but in my post grad life, I've transitioned more to Notion and Bear.
Okay, nice. No, a wide range of options there. Okay, so that's great. And then, so that was the book. That was LA Stories, yeah, the one that was published in college. And then the second time around, for your second book, was it easier? Big, what were some mistakes you made in the first one that you realized in the second one? And then what are kind of some tips for people trying to create their own, maybe self-published books that you would give, having gone through the process twice?
Sure. I think I would definitely say the second book was a lot easier. And um, I mean, I think the biggest difference was the timeline that it took. So my second book, I wrote it pretty quickly. It's about COVID, and I published it December of last year. So that already is like a 1-year timeline, and that one is illustrated as well. I think in the publishing world, or if you're an aspiring writer, I honestly think the first piece of work that you put out to the public is the hardest. With LA Baby, there was just so much personal kind of fear tied into it. And even when I had a completely finished manuscript, there was like a month where I was just teetering between, I'm going to publish it, no, I'm not. Because there's just, I think for a lot of artists, there's that fear of putting your work out there and that fear of judgment. So I think that was definitely present when I was writing LA Baby. But after that book was published and I got a lot of positive reception from readers, that made the process for the second book a lot easier, especially like mentally and personally.
Interesting. Yeah. And I can imagine there was probably a lot of personal details in that first book as well. So which probably makes it even harder to publish. Okay.
Right.
So yeah. So that was the book era of your entrepreneurial success. Going into the e-commerce side of things, I know this is more new for you. Was there any indication of like, hey, I should create this brand or I should find this product? What was why did you start that e-commerce brand? And were there any kind of pushing factors that led you to do it?
Sure. So I think for entrepreneurship, there's a lot of risk taking always. I think it's really important to back that risk taking with research and critical thinking. So for me, I've studied entrepreneurship, and I have a lot of friends who are entrepreneurs. And so at the time, it was also partly market timing. So Instagram had made their shopping button like the main button on their updated app version. And during COVID, like with the changing like work lifestyles and kind of like the more time that people had, like there were definitely a lot of e-commerce brands springing up. So that kind of factored into this like market timing. I will say for Babeboxers specifically, my initial idea was to actually do a fashion brand launched under my own personal brand. So I'm pretty tall. So I wanted to do a boutique kind of catered towards taller women. So I put in a lot of market research, put together a business plan. But it's a competitive market. Like the Instagram retail fashion market's very competitive. So I definitely had my doubts. And then kind of along that time, my sister kept bringing up this idea of girl boxers. So then I did a little more research into that field, and it's an idea that I personally love. I'm a big fan of like loungewear. So after doing a bit of research into that, I decided it was a much more viable and kind of more original, unique idea that had a better market, I guess, a product market fit. So we kind of went from there. So I would say there's definitely, a lot of research, and it wasn't the original idea that I had. There was a lot of pivot involved.
Yeah, well, you're the master at pivoting, really.
I really am, yeah.
And I think that's actually a common trait in a lot of entrepreneurs. Your first idea is rarely the one that works out. Adapting to fan feedback, customer feedback, feedback from readers, whether it's a blog or a book or whatever, all of those sorts of things, I think, shape your actual final product. And those ones are always a little bit more successful than the ones that you had originally planned for. So super big takeaway there for everybody listening. Your first idea is probably not going to be the winning one.
Yeah, and kind of going off of that, I think that's honestly the difference between a starving artist and an entrepreneur. I think as an artist with a very strong message, I've studied like a lot of the famous artists through time, and they take their vision and live it through till the end. But I think the difference in entrepreneurship is being able to stay true to yourself, but also pivot based on outside feedback. So I think that's kind of like an interesting difference between those types of people.
Interesting. And so which one would you rather be? Because you're kind of a little bit into both. Are you liking the artist route or are you liking the entrepreneur route?
So I've always had a lot of that like artist mentality, like from a very young age. And being a writer is probably one of my biggest dreams and kind of like the ultimate life goal. But kind of given my interest towards business and strategy, I'm very attracted to entrepreneurship as well. So I would say I'm really like a mix of those two things. And that's why I really describe myself as a creative entrepreneur.
Okay, fair enough. No, it's a good to have a balance of both those things, I think. Okay, and so with your e-commerce brand, what was do you design all the products yourself because you have that design background?
Yeah, we do. So my sister and I are both very passionate about fashion. We're both huge consumers ourselves. So all the aspects of the marketing and the product are all put together by us.
Okay. And so how do you design things that you think people will want to buy? Or like, what's your process of launching a new product and then, mitigating the chance of it not selling well?
Yeah, so definitely from an inventory perspective, starting out small, that's a piece of advice I hear from a lot of successful e-commerce business owners. But I mean, that can be hard to just given like supply chain and budget. For us, what's worked really well is listening to our customer base. So a lot of times we'll do Instagram polls, actually like asking people what designs they want to see, what colors they want to see, or kind of offering different options. And then we'll go like exactly with what people want or the majority vote.
Nice. And so how often are you launching new products and how often are you doing these polls?
Yeah, sure. So we are aiming to have monthly product launch. Right now, with the supply chain, it's a little bit difficult with COVID, but we are planning to do monthly or even multiple times a month product launches. And I would say we probably don't take a market pull for every product design. Some of them are based off of concepts that are already doing well in the market, or that we just kind of really vibe with from a design perspective. So I'd say about half the time we try to pull. And I mean, I think that's kind of the great thing about businesses being on social media platforms is that there's always a need to be putting out content, engaging content. And so it's really like killing two birds with one stone, doing product research while also building out the Instagram profile.
Got it. Nice. And then how do you sort of position your brand to be different? Like, I know it's really hard in the fashion space, just in e-commerce in general, really. There's so many different e-commerce stores and everything. So what do you do in your e-commerce brand to sort of make it stand out and be different, to attract people to your brand as opposed to them, going somewhere else?
Yeah. So I definitely think a lot of great ideas come from a need in your own lifestyle. So that was definitely the case for my sister, and me as well. But there's kind of a few big brands that do sleepwear for girls. Victoria's Secret kind of being one of the big players. But I've heard so many stories of girls like stealing their boyfriend's boxers and wearing them around. So it really came directly from like an immediate thing that was missing in the market for us. And I think what makes it unique is the mix of what's traditionally a men's product, like boxer briefs, with the more feminine branding and the way that the product is kind of designed with the girl or woman's lifestyle needs. So like in a lot of ways, boxers are a great product for women. It's just like they're not designed for that market yet.
Yeah, no, it's interesting how you've sort of, like a lot of the brands that we interview and talk to and work with, a lot of them have found these little niches to start in and then they expand out from there. And usually the more unique the niche, the more success they have in getting off the ground and then expanding later, because it's very hard to do everything well to start with. And so niching down into that like little segment that you've kind of identified there, is probably much more successful than trying to launch in, all sleepwear apparel, for example, versus, just a very specific type of sleepwear apparel. So yeah, it's interesting how that trend seems to be common in the more successful brands. Okay, and the other question I was going to say, it's a massive amount of work for people listening. It's a huge amount of work to start an e-commerce brand. What are a few things that you can take away from that experience and share with people who are thinking about starting their own e-commerce brand? What's kind of like a few things that you wish you had known when you were getting into it?
Sure. For me, I'm really thankful to have my sister as a co-founder. I think that's been really grounding in our launch process. So I would say finding the right blend of talent, and if you don't want to put everything on yourself, like it's definitely okay to like collaborate and build out a team. So we've actually expanded our team with a TikTok intern about 2 months ago. So she's, we're a great team of like 3 girls now, and that's been super fun and just productive as well for all of us. So I think that aspect was really helpful because it is very stressful and there's a lot of pieces to the picture. I'd say also like the other thing is having a passion for the product and the mission, the purpose that your brand is serving. So that's definitely one of the things that pulls us up through all the work and the planning we do, is really seeing the customer and the way that the product can impact their lives. I think having passion for that is really important.
Nice. Okay. And then are there any big mistakes you made that you would be like, okay, if I was to do this again, I wouldn't do that?
I wouldn't say we've run into any huge mistakes at that point. I'm sure there will be many to come down the line. We are kind of starting out from a smaller scale, so there's not, a lot that we've put to be at stake. So I will get back to you on that one when it comes. Thankfully, nothing too bad right now.
No, that's great. And, if you can avoid those, then fantastic. Because there's sometimes when we interview people, there's some big mistakes. They'd be like, okay, if I was to redo this, I would never do that again. But I think the main big takeaway is, having a co-founder. That's a huge benefit if you can find someone with complementary skill sets and partnering up with them. We did that with a few of our companies, and it's hugely beneficial. And I think the success rate on co-founder companies is much higher than solopreneurs. But obviously, if you don't have a sister that you can team up with, then it can be a challenge finding co-founders. So I understand why some people don't do it. Okay, so my next question would be, how are you marketing Babeboxers? How are you sort of getting it out there in the market? How are you generating sales?
Yeah, sure. So one concept that we're definitely focusing on for our marketing is word of mouth. So this is word of mouth is like the swaying conversion factor. So it really has a high impact on consumers. So given like the nature of our product and target audience, we really want our girl boxers to be something that people are getting excited about and sharing with their friends. So the way that's like actually executed is through Instagram and kind of getting the word out through influencers and through our own social media profiles. But that word of mouth kind of tactic honestly is present in every stage of the product, from the design itself to the way we shoot and describe the products to the eventual marketing channels that the consumers actually interact with. So right now, we are focused a lot on influencer marketing through Instagram specifically. But after onboarding our TikTok intern a few months ago, we've also been building out our TikTok platform, and she's been doing a fantastic job with that. And then in the summer and moving forward, we're also definitely looking into moving into Pinterest as well.
Nice, yeah. And I know, because we work with a lot of e-commerce brands, and we usually find Pinterest, TikTok, Snapchat, those sort of channels a lot more top of funnel.
Right.
Um, Top of funnel meaning people who haven't really ever heard of your brand before. You're kind of like introducing your brand and your products and that sort of stuff. So in terms of TikTok, it's a very new platform. What are some tips that you've possibly implemented or learnt from your intern that is being used that's really successful on TikTok right now? Because it's a very new platform for a lot of brands, and I think a lot of them are a little bit confused on how to make it work for marketing rather than just having it as a content consumption channel where it's just challenges and dances. How does a brand get involved, and how do they actually leverage TikTok for generating sales?
Yeah, sure. So I definitely agree that there's a lot of kind of confusion towards the TikTok platform and kind of the best practices around that. That's kind of something I'm definitely still trying to figure out myself, and I don't know if I ever will. But I think kind of what our team likes to have in mind is just being experimentative and having fun and being organic with the process. Um, I think it's so hard to predict what makes a TikTok video actually do well. And our intern, Paula, she actually put out a TikTok the other day and it's doing super well, but she was commenting that it was so random because she literally just took it after one of her tests. It was like a low effort TikTok compared to the ones she normally makes. So I think it's just so arbitrary. But I think, again, the consistency and the output of content. But then from there on, like not being too results oriented, of course, double downing on like what works. I think following trends on TikTok is always a great way to grow. But I think it's kind of keeping it fun and like consistent with your brand and messaging, and then just like sticking with it is the best approach for businesses.
And what sort of content are you creating? As kind of like, Babeboxers is kind of like sleepwear. What sort of content do you actually create for TikTok?
Yeah, sure. So like the boxers start out as sleepwear, but our kind of vision for them is really to be integrated into lifestyle because they are longer shorts. So they are something you could, definitely go like grocery shopping or walking your dog in. And so I think that's something we're really trying to illustrate to consumers a little bit more about our brand. So TikTok is a great platform to illustrate that. So we'll do things like a morning routine or like different outfits that you can style the boxers with. And a lot of these are like streetwear outfits. So I think TikTok, there's a lot of opportunity to creatively showcase your product and some of the unique qualities and use cases of the product.
Yeah, interesting. Because I know a lot of brands do struggle with like creative concepts for their actual content. And, whether it's them doing it socially, organically, or whether they're using the ads, a lot of people will default back to user-generated content and then, just basic product shots. But, I think TikTok is really pushing the creativity of business owners and people to create more interesting content, which I really like. Because I think the consumer benefits, and then, but the brand obviously has to do a better job at creating that content. I know you have a creative background, so is there any tips you can give on, when they create that content, how to make it, good? Because I've seen a lot of bad content created by brands.
Yeah, so I think like one of the great things about the TikTok platform is that it is pretty easy to capitalize on other people's creative ideas. So we see a lot of like reiteration of trends. I think within that too, there's a lot of potential for like creative experimentation. So even if you're remaking someone else's trend, you can be creative in like the background you use or the voiceovers that you use, or the person that you feature in the TikTok. So I think one creative like strategy, I guess, would be juxtaposing different elements and creating that like kind of unexpected, if it's like a filming angle or a background or like a character, like it doesn't have to be this huge thought out concept, but sometimes even just tweaking the little details.
Yeah, that's some great tips actually. And then the other thing I was going to say, a lot of brands worry about the production value, but really, it's just kind of most of it is just done on an iPhone. So I think brands need to kind of get over the fact that you don't have to have this massive production crew. You don't have to have big influencers or anything like that. It's just literally about creating content, and then your audience will let you know what they like and don't like. Um, but yeah, it sounds like you guys are kind of doing that as well. It's just kind of, doing it all through phones and stuff. You don't need crazy high production value.
Oh yeah, definitely not. And I think like with the algorithm and stuff, like it can be disadvantageous to put too much production value into it. I think that can like that's kind of a challenge for a lot of content creators, like especially ones coming more from like a YouTube production or like a high production background. Even for myself, like it's pretty challenging to switch from like DSLR videography into like iPhone videos. But yeah, I think kind of really getting used to that organic, quick layout of creating videos on that platform.
Mm. Okay, so Ali, you have so much going on. Where do you see your next, like 12, 24 months going? Are you looking to keep creating books, keep doing digital campaigns for other brands, or grow your e-commerce brands? What's your next 12, 24 months look like?
Yeah, so I definitely love working with brands for their digital marketing, and it's a great way for me to learn about different industries and like best practices, as well as kind of like leverage their resources and put myself to these like unique challenges that their brands are facing. So that's definitely a big part of my plan moving forward. And part of that is just really being receptive to the trends in the marketing space and kind of
Mm-hmm.
keep on learning and like reading great books and such. In terms of my writing career, I decided to kind of take a stop after isolation. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I definitely have plans kind of like in the next few years to write a few more books. Um, so I'm actually from, like my family is from Shanghai, and Chinese was actually my first language, even though I've lived in the States like pretty much my whole life. So I definitely see myself writing books that are more geared towards Asian countries in the future. I
Okay.
definitely am passionate about traveling and such. It's hard during COVID, but
Yeah.
yeah. So in terms of my book career, and I think really just collaborating with more creative people around my books. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so like I had the opportunity last year to partner with Joseph Levitt Gordon's creative platform, and so I have like 1,000 submissions of like voice recordings and photos submitted for my poems. So that was like a super cool example of a creative
Wow.
collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
So working on that moving forward, and then of course continuing with the like strategy and management of Babeboxers. We really hope to bring boxers to girls all across America. It's kind of like our one of our mottos.
Yeah, so there's actually a few questions coming from that. So, one, how do you see, like, I can see the connection of, Western US e-commerce colliding with, Chinese e-commerce, as there's such a big market there. You've seen like companies like Alibaba and other companies do really, really well in e-commerce. Do you think there's going to be a bridge between those two markets? You've obviously got kind of a little bit more of a connection to the China side. Do you see in the future trends involving, US and Chinese brands, and then cross-market collaboration? Because I'm sure, your product would do really well in China as well.
I definitely see more and more integration. I mean, a lot of it I think right now is still behind the scenes, but even on platforms like Amazon, like so many of those basic consumer products like scales or kitchen appliances are like Chinese brands. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Marketed as like local US brands or whatever. But even actually the TikTok platform itself, I worked with Alibaba my sophomore year of college in one
Mm-hmm.
of their ad hoc like live streaming programs. So the
Mm-hmm.
founder of like Chinese Uber actually like came to UCLA for a period to work with like
Wow.
and like our team of UCLA students. It was a super cool opportunity. But
Yeah,
at that
amazing.
time, this was like 2016, we were doing a ton of live streaming research. and a lot of research on China's platform Douyin, which is like the Chinese TikTok. So kind of already at that time, I was like, this is going to catch on in America, like at some point. So I think a lot of times we can look at other countries for like incoming trends. Like that's super common in the fashion world, but I think definitely kind of like in tech and like the consumer marketplace as well.
Yeah, because there's a few platforms that have recently come on our radar with a few of the e-commerce brands we work with. So there is PopShop Live, which is kind of like QVC of apps. So it's like live episodes or shows which have an e-commerce component, which is really interesting. And I think the concept sort of came from China actually, or at least, I think it was China, South Korea, or somewhere in the Asian world. And then now they're kind of starting to introduce it into America. America doesn't really have that much background in, live streaming and shopping. They're much more old school with just buying from Instagram. But yeah, so there's PopShop Live and there's the Network, which are two platforms that have recently become sort of more and more popular. And we're starting to hear a little bit more about these. And I think that could be a bridge between, America and China in how e-commerce is kind of used. I suppose it's just, hard to roll out a platform across two massive places.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of kind of like cultural and like regulatory blockages in place as well. So I think it's definitely it's an interesting field. And then in terms of what you're saying for the Topshop Live, so that's actually the exact project that we were working on for Alibaba. I mean, not the same company, but the exact model. So our team was working with Melrose boutiques and fashion stores and connecting them with Chinese live streamers to do like exactly what you said, like basically have these live stream episodes and then be selling the products directly.
Is that something you're going to do with Babeboxers or no?
No, we're kind of trying to keep it a little bit more simple and honestly like a little bit less tech focused. I'm a very like hands-on person again. So I love tech, but I like kind of the times before tech too. So with our entire company, we try to keep the process very like visual and immediate. So like we put a lot of work into our packaging. So yeah, I'm kind of going to keep it a little bit more like on the grounds and less tech focused.
No, that's good. Zig when everybody's zagging. And you do very well. But Ally, this has been an amazing episode. So much information, a lot of motivational stuff actually for anybody listening who's looking at starting their own side hustle, writing their own book, creating their own e-commerce store, all these different things you can go out and do because the barrier to entry is lower than ever. So you definitely want to get in there while you can. Where can everybody find out more about what you're doing, follow along? This is, your moment to sort of direct people in the right to the right place to find out more about you.
Yeah, sure. So you can always find me on my blog. So it's just my name, allygong.com. You can connect with me on Instagram or YouTube. So all my kind of personal brands are all under my name, Ally Gong. Pretty easy to remember. You can find Babeboxers on Instagram as well. And my book, LA Baby, you can find on Amazon under my name, Ally Gong.
Nice. Well, so many different things going on. So I'll make sure to add all of those different links in the show notes. But Ally, really appreciate you taking the time. It's been great learning about your story, about all the different business ventures you have going on. It sounds like you're, successful on so many levels. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jack, for having me on Blitz Growth. Super exciting what you guys are doing. And I hope this content can be motivational and inspirational to you listeners out there.
Hey guys, we put a bunch of effort into making great content for this YouTube channel, so please hit subscribe, leave us a comment, hit like, and tell a few friends about it.